Welcome to the Influence School podcast. I'm Nate Woodbury, founder of Be the Hero Studios, producer of dozens of YouTube channels, earning as much as 7 figures monthly. Our mission is to help you elevate your influence and succeed in entrepreneurship. Stick around to the end of the show and I'll share how you can be our guest on one of the fastest growing daily entrepreneur podcasts. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Influence School podcast. I am your host, Devin Cash. I'm so excited to have a few minutes to pick the brain of our guest today. He's a talent strategist. He's a company culture expert. He's one of the foremost experts today on the future of work. He's a highly sought after keynote speaker. He's Steve Cadigan. Steve, how's it going? Thanks for joining me for a few minutes today.
It's going great. So great to be here, Devin. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and anytime. Yes. So, hey, before we get real into it, you have a really fascinating story. I just want to learn a little bit about and share with us where you've been, what you're doing now, and where you're heading.
Sure. I think the context really matters, and I'm a high context person. So, a little bit of my background. I actually grew up in South Africa, which not a lot of people know. My parents were adventurers, and that fed heavily into how I thought about my career when I finished up school. But first 5 years of my life, I grew up in South Africa. We moved back to the States when I was about 7, and mostly educated on the East Coast of the US. Decided to major in history for no other reason than I liked the subject. My dad's a minister. My mom ran daycare centers. And throughout my college experience, I really had no idea what I wanted to do professionally at all. I just kind of knew I didn't want to do what my parents were doing. And that's the only point of reference I had. Every man on my father's side of the family had been an ordained Episcopal minister. Wow. So I'm sort of the one that got away. My parents like, where do we go wrong with him?
That's some pressure though, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, my parents were super open around, me exploring any kind of career that was interesting, but business was an unknown domain to them, right? They didn't really understand it, little apprehensive about it. I had one on-campus interview when I was finishing up my history degree, and that was with a company in San Francisco called Esprit. It was a fashion company, really hot at the time. This is sort of the mid 80s.
Oh yeah, my sister was all about it. I can picture the logo very, very well.
Yep. And I was hit up by many people like your sister for give me that employee discount. We want to hit the outlet malls. About 9 months into my first job at Esprit, I started as a credit and collections analyst. I fell into human resources, and they wanted me to join their recruiting organization. And I thought, wow, I get to interview people. That sounds really neat. I get to meet a lot of folks, and I knew I was an extrovert, and I didn't know much about the world of human resources or talent at the time, but it was love at first sight. And I feel so lucky at the age of 19-ish, I found something that has become a lifelong passion for me. And so worked in that company, Esprit, as a recruiter, and then got into more deeper elements of human resources, employee relations, coaching, learning and development, compensation, benefits, a bunch of other things. And I wanted to leave and try it in a different domain. So I went to a big insurance company. So I walk into the door at Fireman's Fund, and I used to wearing t-shirt and shorts, and now I'm wearing like a 3-piece suit every day. And this is before business casual.
Sure.
So it was kind of a big jump, but I was able to work in a bigger organization where I could learn and sharpen my skills because there are more people that are experts in human resources there, right? I went from a team of like 9 HR people to a team of like 250.
Wow.
With various levels of expertise. And so that really got me more fired up and more confirmed in my mind that, hey, I really like this. I think I'm pretty good at it. And what resonated for me, Devin, at that point was, I think so many people don't know when you finish school, or even if you don't finish college, you don't really know what's your passion. You don't know, do I like working in small teams, big teams, long projects, short projects? Do I like working in a family-owned business, an internationally owned business, a U.S.-owned business, a multinational organization? Do I like working on, high-pressure projects? Do I like working independently? What kind of management style resonates? We don't know these things. Mm-hmm. And there's no way to know it because until you try lots of different things, you don't really know what suits you. And so I went from sort of a very open concept, very flexible, flat retail business to a very hierarchical, very bureaucratic insurance company. So now I have 2 points of data. Like, okay,
Sure.
I like the professionalism of the insurance business, but I really like the freedom and the openness to try new things that I saw in retail. And I love the energy of retail way more than I like the slow moving insurance company where we have a meeting to decide who to invite to the meeting, which is like, come on, you're kidding me. We're really doing that. So after about 4 years in insurance, I got approached by my first headhunter call. I'll never forget it. I never forget the name of the recruiter. It was Tom Gilbert. And I was like, wow, someone wants me? Like there's a headhunter? And it was really, it's kind of a cool moment. So
Sure.
I'm sitting there, I'm an HR manager in insurance, and this technology company called AMD, which at the time was a real big competitor to Intel, called and said, we'd like to talk to you about being an HR manager. I interviewed, got the job. So then I went to what I thought was, high tech. And at that time, I didn't know, well, high tech is a huge domain and there's, software, hardware, all kinds of different technology. But I fell in love with the real openness to experiment with new ways of leading and organizing and communicating and different ways of, tweaking culture to generate a different outcome. And I'd never seen a company be as open and creative as I saw companies were in Silicon Valley at the time.
Yeah.
So I did that for 4 years, loved it. After a few years there, a friend moved over to a company called Cisco at the time, which one of the hottest companies in tech. I was recruited there to do M&A integration. And that was probably the coolest job at the time for me, that I got to travel around the world. Cisco bought the companies and I would go and, drop ship in and integrate those people into Cisco.
Wow.
Incredibly challenging. And have you ever been in an organization, Devin, that got acquired?
No.
Ever experienced that? Okay. Well, it's one of
one
of the most.
Okay. Actually, now that you mention it, and this is going back, right? So the first job I ever had was Wendy's. So I started working at Wendy's when I was 14 years old, and we were, and I worked at the North Salt Lake Wendy's, and I was part of a franchisee run company, and the franchisee owned 25, 26 of these Wendy's in Utah. And Wendy's, I worked there for 4 years. And when I was 17, Wendy's International came and bought out all the stores. And
oh, wow.
And so you're talking about, it's the same place, right? But the culture shift, they started saying, you guys aren't doing it this way. You got to do it this way. You got to do this. And the backlash, you would have thought that, that they were asking us to, commit murder or whatever, based on, oh, you got to drop this many chicken patties because we know they're going to sell this many. We're like, that's not how we do things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
But the introduction of new leaders, that's a great experience you just shared. The introduction of new leadership causes you on the receiving end as the acquired person, like, am I going to be let go? Are they going to restructure? Am I going to have a new boss? Are they going to change my pay? Are we going to get, outsourced? Like, what's going to happen here? And so I fell in love with the high, drama of an acquisition integration. Like, I really felt like my skills could be applied. Like, I tend to be calm when everyone else is feeling high amounts of stress, and I tend to be a calming influence. So I found, okay, wow, now this is where I can really add value in high-paced, high stressful environments. I can help, bring levels of trust and levels of, order to something that seems kind of chaotic. So I did that for 4 years, integrated 50 companies, built a team where there was just 4 of us when I started, and when I left, when the dot-com bubble burst and we didn't acquire companies anymore, there were about 25 of us. So I was building a practice and hiring people and training them while we're also integrating. So amazing stories. I got to write a book on the crazy stuff that we found out in some acquisitions one day, because it really is just a wild frontier. And so I did that. And when go ahead.
No, just help me. So help me with the timeline at this point. So you were with Cisco for 4 years, and you're gone now. And what year is it? You said the dot-com bubble burst. So is this
right? So I was there. Actually, I was there 6 years, but the 4 years I was just doing M&A. So we did it from like 98 to 2002. And when the dot-com bubble burst, this is where things get really interesting. I was asked to go to Asia, to Singapore, to be the head of human resources for Cisco Asia, where we had about 3,000 employees from South Korea all the way down to Australia and New Zealand. And so that was like a head explosion for me, learning, new cultures and trying to get, some sort of corporate cohesion where you have all these different countries, which I didn't even understand. Like, sure. I didn't understand how different you need to engage with the Chinese versus the Hong Kong versus the Taiwanese versus the South Korean. It was just fascinating learning for me. And my head is still recovering from that. And it was, so now we're talking 2002 through 2004. So I'd been at the company about 6 years, which for me is the longest I've ever been anywhere. And I was getting signals from headquarters back in California, you need to get back. And I'm thinking, I don't want to go back. And my first child was born there in Singapore. Wow. And this was during SARS, actually. So I have a little bit of pandemic experience, having been in Asia when SARS hit. And so I didn't want to go back to what I called expensive land, California, just yet. And at the same time, I had an opportunity to fall in my lap in British Columbia, in Vancouver. Now, I should let the audience know I'm a bit of a snowboarding fanatic. And I had been to British Columbia snowboarding at Whistler. Yeah. And I've been to Park City a bunch of times. So I love PCMR. Yeah. But I had a few vacations snowboarding at Whistler, which to me is like heaven equals Whistler. And I'd said to myself, if I ever have a chance to work there, I would go for it. And be careful what you wish for, because I got a job offer to go to Vancouver to be, for the first time for me, and this is 2004 now, the head of human resources for an organization. And I wasn't quite sure, Devin, if I wanted to do that, because I'd never seen many heads of HR that I respected or that I wanted to be like. So I was a little bit of a reluctant candidate, and they kind of had to talk me into it. And I was like, okay, well, I'll give it a try, but I'm not sure I'm going to like this, and we'll see. But it was a small company. I was coming from Cisco, was about 30,000, and this company was about 1,500. And I loved the leadership team. I wanted to be in Vancouver, and I thought, what a great new learning and a new lesson. And I think that the theme of my career arc at this point was, and what I'd like to sort of share with listeners is, one of the coolest parts about a profession like HR is I can go multi-industry, multi-geography. I'm immune from any downturn in a particular vertical. And that's something that has served me really, really well. And again, I accidentally fell into HR. I didn't choose it. Didn't even know what the profession was in college. Sure. So now here I am, in sort of my mid 30s, head of HR of a, it was a NASDAQ public company called PMC Sierra, sitting in Vancouver, British Columbia. Dealing with the aftermath of the dot-com bubble burst is really hard times for a lot of tech companies. And dealt with a lot of staff reductions and consolidation. And we went all the way down to 800 people from 1,500 when I was there. So that was really hard, really hard. I mean, how do you get a team motivated when you have to let people go, And so now we're sitting in that role, loving it for 4 years. I get approached by a really sexy video game company, Electronic Arts, comes knock, knock. Who's there? It's a video game. Wait, I can play video games guilt-free and work, as part of the company. So they seduced me, and I took the opportunity to go to EA and they were intending to do lots of M&A work. So I was not going to be the head of HR, going to be sort of like the number 2 HR person there. And so I thought, okay, great. And I was sort of ready to get back to the US to have I had twins that were born in Canada. And that because they're, Canadian, they're a little cold to the touch when you touch them because they're born up north. But anyway, so I was ready for, a reality where my kids were closer to their grandparents. So decided to go back to the US, and Electronic Arts relocated me. And I'll never forget the first day on the job. After my new hire orientation, my boss picks me up and says, "Hey, Steve, I need to give you some advice." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Steve, decisions here are governed more by drama than data." And I thought, what does that mean exactly? And she said, "Well, what it means is if someone doesn't get promoted, they're going to kick and scream and threaten to quit and take their whole team with them and start another game studio." And I'm like, okay, well, we can't, be hostages to that. She says, "No, we'll give them more money because they're acting with drama." And I'm like, holy cow. So I realized that wasn't the kind of culture that I wanted to be a part of. It was really, really fun in some respects, but again, now it's 2008. another economic recession hits and the company is in difficult straits. So probably about 9 months into that job, I realized I don't really want to stay here. And that's when LinkedIn came knocking and said, would you consider being our first head of human resources? They were 6 years old at the time, 400 people. And I interviewed with them. It was sort of like speed dating, speed interviewing. I think I met 14 people in one day.
Wow.
And I got the job offer the next day. And I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks. I was so excited. I thought this is going to be the adventure of a lifetime. Never been in a tiny company, tiny figurative term, tiny company for me, 400 people. They're only 6 years old. And I was going to get a chance to build a company, build a human resource team. And so I took it. And for the next 3.5 years, which felt like 20, we took that company from 400 to 4,000, from 3 offices to 26, from 2 countries to 17. Wow. Had a phenomenally successful IPO exit. And as you can see, I had a dark head of hair before that that experience, and that is now gone officially. Thankfully, I still have hair.
For those who are listening on the podcast, Steve's hair is kind of gray. So that
yeah, true. So that was an incredible adventure, Devin. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you. It was not what I thought it would be. I thought, it was going to be relatively easy to build a company. It's not. It's really, really hard, super hard, way harder than I thought. I mean, and when you're the human resource organization, how are we going to recruit? This is our biggest challenge. How are we going to recruit in the shadows of Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, who can all pay more, who all have sexier brands, who all can resonate with candidates with their value proposition? We're a boring professional network. And that was the story, that sort of the crowning moment of my career was we built a culture that allowed us to beat those competitors who were paying more and had more to offer, more perks and more sex appeal. Yeah. And we wound up winning more candidates against them because we built such an amazing employment experience. And so after doing that for about 3.5 years, I decided to go out on my own. And for the last 10 years or so now, I've been helping companies and individuals rethink talent strategies and leverage culture in a real competitive way. And it's just been a complete blast. So that sort of brings me up to date a little bit with how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, thanks a bunch for that. Wow. Yeah, like I said, I was ready for it because I knew that you had a pretty amazing story. So what are you most excited about right now?
Oh gosh, right now, I was finishing a book on the future of work about 9 months ago. And I don't know if you heard, but there's this pandemic going around. I woke up one day and I'm like, oh no, what if the last 1.5 years of writing this book is now going to be useless because the future work is going to be, completely different than what I was forecasting it to be. Yeah. And I had a few sleepless nights, but I did wake up and say, no, I think I'm good. I think this coronavirus is actually accelerating a lot of the things I talk about in my book. So let me just add in coronavirus final chapter on what we know as of now. And so I'm super excited to, be able to, on the eve of publishing a book, I hope it comes out Q1, Q2 around the future of work, which is more of a story of hope than the narrative we see so often in the media around run for the hills, robots and artificial intelligence are going to take your job. And, half the jobs in 20 years don't even exist today, which is scare tactics. I think we're really, it's the worst marketing campaign in history, which is the future of work is being presented as very, very scary when there are so many interesting upsides. So I'm trying to portray a more hopeful picture. And I get to today work with so many different organizations, whether it's, Salesforce in Spain. Last night I was on a call with the Emirates Bank leadership team in Dubai. Oh, wow. The other day, I'm talking to the human resource leadership team at Kellogg's Corporation. So I get huge diversity. And this is one of the things I love about being independent now is I get to really span lots of industries and geographies. So I'm excited right now because I think crises like we're going through right now present great opportunities for people to show their leadership, right? And I would call COVID, honestly, Devin, I would call COVID like the most interesting leadership experience of our lifetime, leadership test, if you will, because we're getting to see globally how countries, companies, leaders are handling a moment of crisis. Yeah. And that's going to serve us well. when we get through this, when we will get through this into some sort of new never normal, and you'll be able to interact again. But now we're going to see when your back was to the wall, Mr. or Mrs. Corporation, how did you handle it? Did you triple charge for those PPEs to try to reap a profit when people are disadvantaged, or did you convert your factory for free and produce respirators to help the cause?
Yeah.
Did you lay everyone off, or most of the people in your organization off, without really trying to be creative around keeping people employed longer? Or what did you do? And so we've got this incredible reservoir of data now that we're seeing how companies have handled it. And I think that's going to, like I said, it's going to serve us really well when we get to the point where rehiring starts to happen at scale.
Yeah, that's been a pretty, obviously, we're recording this, it's December 8th of 2020. So we're right smack in the middle of the pandemic still. And so, it's obviously been a topic that's been pretty high on most people's minds. But as we've talked about it, oftentimes it gets compared to the recession of 08, 09. You described it as a crisis, or these crises that really, it's a moment where people point to, they point to that 08, 09 recession over and over again, and tell the story of how it really just destroyed whatever it was that they were doing. It like all of a sudden, the business was gone, or their clients all left, or, they got fired, whatever it was. And the story from that point on is always, and then I learned this, and this is how I got through that. And it's a real, it's always a really inspirational story of how we as humans, when we're faced with whatever adversity it is, we get through it. And so you're right, we are going to get through this. But it has been a really, really interesting, and I'm excited to talk to you about this, being an expert on the future of work. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to know what your projections were as far as, this kind of work from home revolution that's happened. Because in my head, it was coming, right? We all knew the couple of people that, oh yeah, they get to work from home once a week or whatever it was. Like it was coming. But I feel like COVID has just totally accelerated that. So I'm curious, what do you think? What were your projections on when that was really going to be kind of the norm? And do you see us ever really going back to the way things were?
Yeah, such a great, experience that we're all facing right now. It's like a digital transformation has been forced upon everyone. And my home here became an office and a school at the same time, right? Like no one was projecting that, and no one really knows how this is honestly going to play out. We really don't know.
Sure.
And I'll give you a conversation I had, recently with someone around this, which I think is pretty interesting. Honestly, to answer your question, Devin, I've never been a massive believer in extreme work from home, because I believe a lot of the innovation traditionally has happened when we're proximate, when we're close, and those informal moments, those not the planned moments. And I'm struggling to see, how do we replace those informal interactions where creativity and brainstorming happens in an entirely digital interface. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. And particularly, when we were growing LinkedIn in the early days, and I call it going through organizational puberty, having everyone together, sharing ideas in real time and iterating and feeling the energy and excitement and being able to in real time, test new things and course correct. And that's a lot of what you're doing in technology is you're trying, you're implementing, you're observing, you're correcting, you're implementing, observing, correcting, and just this loop of experimentation. How do we do that fully remote? And I'm really surprised, honestly, about how many companies are saying, oh, we're definitely going to be 100% remote. And I said, really? Do you even know if you can innovate? Do you know that your customers are going to prefer the value we're going to bring to them in a fully remote environment? How about you say, for the foreseeable future, for everyone's safety and comfort, we're going to have to do this. Sure. And then let's reassess in 6 to 9 months. So I think we're going to see the organizations that I'm talking to right now, most of them are fully expecting a hybrid. So even, so pharma, for example, you got a lab. You're trying to solve cancer.
Right.
How are you going to do that out of the lab? Like, can you create a, virtual lab? Are you going to be able to do that? I don't know. We don't know yet. So there are some professions where, that's going to be trickier to be able to realize. But I do think, some organizations are going to say, okay, we're going to have a, hybrid model, a week in, a week home, or 2 weeks in, 2 weeks home. But it also gets to a whole nother dimension, which is interesting, which is, so how are you going to deal with all those people? So let's take Facebook, for example. They've announced for the remainder of this year and probably the first half of next year, everyone's going to work remote. Okay. So what happens to that high-paid San Francisco engineer that's now moved to, Bismarck, North Dakota? Like,
Ogden,
cost of living a little
example.
different.
Yeah.
Or Ogden, Utah. Right. So how is that going to work? How are companies going to address that? Because it's a new salary reality for someone, right? And I think, again, companies are having to face decisions and choices they've never had to face before. And it's going to be interesting to see new models develop. Like, there's going to be a new work from home salary band. But I do think that, this acceleration that we're seeing is kind of cool in a way too, and I'm curious what your perspective is on this one. Like, for example, we are more apart than we've ever been, but I'm more in your home and you're more in my home than I've ever been as a colleague. Right. So I'm seeing more of, hey, there's a dog in the background. Someone's crying. Oh, you had a little baby. I didn't know. Oh, who's that? Your parents live at home too. Like, we're learning more about the personal circumstances of our colleagues. And that's interesting. We're also home decor at scale.
Yeah.
Like, you think that's interesting on the wall? Not so sure. So that's building some connective tissue in ways that we never have seen before. Right.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. And when you're on, a large Zoom meeting, it really is. It is a lot more interesting, right? Than there they are in that chair and he's in that chair and, we're all sharing the same space. Yeah. I honestly have I haven't really thought about that, but it does provide more opportunities for greater connectivity. And I've often thought, as I'm doing these interviews, again, for those of you who are on the pod, just listening on the podcast, I've got a fairly blank wall behind me, but I've thought, I should put up some shelves back there and, I should hang my guitar on the wall and I should, throw up my pickleball paddle and a pickleball, just to kind of, so it's like, oh, okay, like Devin's all about that stuff, it just, it provides some insight that, you're right, that we wouldn't otherwise get. But at the same time, then you also lose those moments of, you're waiting for the meeting to start and, hey, Steve, hey, how's the family? I heard this, or, how your parents, this and that, like those moments I feel like are gone. And in a way they were gone anyway, because everybody was just glued to their phones a lot of the time in those circumstances. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a give and take.
Yeah. If we take a look at again, this is just such a culturally interesting time that we're going through. And, that's on the positive side. On the negative side, it's really, really hard for so many people. You're in the restaurant industry, super hard. Anywhere in that value chain, right? One of my boys works for a restaurant supply company. That's been really tough, And so, but what's also interesting, I think, going through, what we're going through right now is, I think, we're getting to see how people are handling this. So, normally I wouldn't see my boss having to negotiate with their spouse for, Wi-Fi bandwidth at home. Now I'm seeing a more human side of someone, which I think is going to be long-term sort of a positive in terms of building, that relationship equity over time. But we're experimenting right now. We don't know how much longer this is going to go. It's probably way longer than we all want. And it's going to, I think, force us to be more creative around how we do use technology in ways. So, for example, I was talking around this a little bit ago, which is, how do we replace those informal interactions we had before in a fully distanced reality? And one organization I'm working with right now is building multiplayer games inside the enterprise. So you've got, accounting is playing against marketing in some sort of multiplayer game, and there's a chat box going, and people are having fun, blowing off steam, finding ways to depressurize.
Yeah.
Wellness is a huge concern for me right now, and it is for most organizations. Because now we were always aware of physical wellness being important. Now we're aware of mental wellness, super important. That was always sort of on the radar, as cases of anxiety, stress, and depression have risen.
Sure.
And if you talk, look at the pharmacy issue with, opioid addictions and so forth, like we are in a world now where, there's a lot of people feeling a lot of stress, and we have that even more now at home. And so how do you know, like, I love how you just framed that checking in with people is super, super important.
Yeah.
And, I think, my advice to leaders today or colleagues is I think we need to have more frequent check-in moments, just like, how's it going?
Yeah.
If someone's worried about their parent, are they going to be ready to talk about work? No. If someone's worried that they've got a toddler schooling from home, and, they are just not going to be as focused because they're concerned about the growth and the welfare of their family. Right.
Yeah.
So, but if on another dimension, talking about sales, if you are a sales rep, good news is you can get to all your customers and you don't have to get on a plane right now because no one's expecting that they have to be wined and dined.
Yeah, sure.
And so CEOs are loving this because they can make way more customer visits, and it's not seen as less valuable than an in-person visit. So that's great. But at the same time, salespeople are not used to selling remotely as much as they are. Let's get a cup of coffee. Let's go and wine you and dine you, or take you on a round of golf or something like that, as has been the norm. So there's real open space for creativity here. Like, how do we woo customers in this world when everyone's sick of looking at a screen, which is super interesting.
Yeah, no question. Wow, great stuff, Steve. So I want to talk about LinkedIn for just a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I'm just curious. So I mean, I wish I had gone back and looked at my account. My guess is that the first time that I got on LinkedIn was probably 2005. Is that, like, they were around, right? I'm not crazy.
They're founded in 2003. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So 05, I would guess. And if you had asked me to buy stock in that company in 05, I mean, and granted, in 05, I was 22 or something like that, 23. But, and so it wasn't exactly my scene, quote unquote, but there's no way that I thought that LinkedIn was going to be around in 2020, not only around, but thriving to the extent that it is, where it truly is one of the, top 3, top 4 platforms that's being used. And so I mean, so frankly, like, what happened? Why didn't it fail? Why didn't it go the way of MySpace?
Gosh, so many thoughts on hearing you ask that question. I think the first one, I'll start sort of big and then sort of get micro on LinkedIn specifically. I think what we're learning in the world of business today is that experimentation and iteration is king. Companies that can adapt and adjust are ones that are going to win. LinkedIn did not start out to be in the recruiting business, did not. Like, let's just share networks and see if we can collaborate together. It was going to be a collaboration platform.
Yeah.
And someone came in and said, hey, you got a lot of people using that. Can we try to recruit people through that? And all of a sudden, bing.
Yeah.
And that turned into be a multi-billion-dollar business. But that's not what they set out to be in. Similar for, most unicorns that were, are household names today, other than I think Airbnb was pretty clear from the start of what their plan was, and it worked out. But most other organizations started somewhere and they moved somewhere else. So I think
Facebook
that
was a dating app, basically, right? I mean,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Or even worse, it was sort of like rate how someone looks,
right?
How their face looks, like But I think so that's how I look at how LinkedIn was able to weather. Is we had a high adaptability index. Now, one of the things, having gone in there and I had this conversation with my parents when I was thinking about taking the job. They're like, what? Who's that company? What? Linked what? Professional what?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. And I had been in big companies most of my career. So I'm looking at this going, okay, I don't even know if this is going to make it, but I've never been in a private company and I've never tried to go to have a IPO. If you're in Silicon Valley, like, why don't you just try it just once? Yeah. And I said, what's the worst that could happen? If this thing does a complete faceplant belly flop, I've built my network, I've met some more people, and I could always go back to the big corporate jobs, right? Those are going to be there. And I've earned my stripes that I can show that I can add value. So why wouldn't I take a leap here? And it was kind of the right time for me. Maybe I was getting a little bit long in the tooth. So I'm sort of like mid 40s. I'm like, I think I can help this company. But when I sat back after I left LinkedIn and just looked at just the way you framed it, like on paper, there really wasn't a no-brainer. This is a layup home run. It wasn't. We had a first-time CEO. Jeff Weiner had never been a CEO before. Nobody on the entire executive team, head of product, head of engineering, head of marketing, head of operations, head of sales, head of HR. No one had ever taken a company public. No one had ever managed prior to going public as many people as we had direct reporting into all of us were out of our depth on paper. Okay.
Yeah.
So there was no destiny here. Right. And yes, did we have some pretty great investors? Yeah. Sequoia, Greylock, Bessemer, some really, really good investors, but so do many organizations that fail and don't make it. Right. There's 10 times more companies that fail than that succeed. So what turned the corner? So it's interesting for me when I hear people say, oh, you had a product that was so easy to sell. Really? No, it wasn't. We had a very complex business. You have a recruiting business, you have a marketing business, you have a subscription business, and then you have the free business of trying to create an engaging experience for people like you, that you want to go to the platform, you want to give us your information, and your data is something that's our prized possession, right? The more you give us about yourself, the more other people are going to want to come and mine that, and we can charge for that. So way more complex than Google's business, which is advertising. We were hardly making any money on advertising, way more complicated than Facebook's. But we never had one of those water, sort of spike hockey stick moments. Our growth at LinkedIn was just slow and gradual. And when Facebook introduced, the photo share just exploded, right? Yeah. We didn't ever really have that explosive moment. It was slow and steady. And there's a really interesting story there, which I love to share, which is, on paper, this never should have happened, but it did. And I think the message for anyone who's an entrepreneur, anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur, is you can build world-class if you've never been world-class before. You can create greatness. And I think one of the big messages and learnings for me personally is the desire that we had as a leadership team to build something amazing was, I think, almost more valuable than if some of us had the experience. And the fact that none of us had ever grown a company like that before made us not know what we should know. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we weren't blocked by, oh, you shouldn't do it that way, you shouldn't do it this way, because we'd never done it before. So we were open to trying new things and learning new things,
Yeah. Wow. What an amazing story. That needs to be a, 8-part Netflix documentary one of these days, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious. So you've been at this for 30 years, give or take. What's the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning?
I think that we can still do so much better with our people strategies. I mean, I'm a culture junkie. I'm a talent strategist junkie, and I feel like we still are using these really old, crusty models of work. The model of work is, okay, you come and you commit to stay with me a long time, and I commit to providing you a job for a long time. It's just like, that's just not real anymore. It's not an honest conversation. And I'm trying to, and this is part of what's inspiring me to write my book is, listen, the biggest labor trend right now in the world of work is people are leaving companies faster than ever before. In the United States right now, the average tenure of someone staying in a company is 4 years. 5 years ago, it used to be 5. And for people between the ages of 20 and 35, that's 2.8 years.
Wow.
That they're staying at a company on average. Now, in technology, I would argue those numbers are lower. In Silicon Valley, the joke is, you don't get a 5-year service award, you get a 5-month service award. You're still here 5 months. It's awesome. Thank you so much. And there's goodness in a marketplace of opportunity. There's goodness that you have more choice, right? That's a good thing.
Sure.
And then so the challenge then becomes, how do I create value? How do I create a valuable experience and company in a highly fluid talent market where people are coming and going faster than ever before? So this is what's gotten me up for the last 4 or 5 years. Like, how can we build a company where people don't stay a long time and build disproportionate value? And the answer is absolutely. If you look at Snap, Uber, Airbnb, Microsoft, Oracle, Apple, Twitter, and Facebook, do you know what the median tenure is for those companies? Less than 2 years.
Wow.
So, maybe, and this is, part of what I'm trying to pull out of my book, maybe we've overvalued tenure. Maybe we've undervalued new people with new ideas and new ways of solving problems. I don't know, what do you think?
No question. I mean, that's the first thing that came to my mind is that, you bring someone in and they're going to come in with, the wealth of knowledge, the experiences that they've had. I've been here, and here. This is what we did here. You know what? It really didn't work. But, I see that maybe if we did it, I mean, yeah, versus like, you've got the good old boys, sitting around the conference table and, and it's the same. Yeah, it's just the same thing over and over again. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So I'll share a conversation from a session I was having. So I was dealing with this very old company. They've been around for, close to a century. And I was talking about this very point, the point that I just shared with you. Like, hey, if we look at all those companies, look at what's going on here. There's a lot of newness. You know what comes with newness? A culture of change. You're used to changing. You're used to new things. And there's also a lot of energy. The whole time I was at LinkedIn, Devin, the whole time, 3.5 years. You know what the average tenure was of that company? 9 months. So, and at their 10-year birthday, they were acquired by Microsoft, or maybe it was 12 years old. They were acquired by Microsoft, $26 billion or $27 billion. In less than 20 years, they created that in a high velocity, high change environment. And so, and this is probably going to be the next book that I'm going to try to go after once I finish this one, which is, I think we've undervalued energy. And let me put it to you this way. When we were at LinkedIn, doubling the size every year, went 400,000, 1,002, 2 to 4 in the 3 years I was there. Insane. Yeah. Insane. What happens is your senior leaders are just recruiting. That's all they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're not closing deals. They're not signing contracts. They're not building product. They are hiring. So what's got to happen is somebody below them steps up to be the manager, the director, the sort of acting VP. And that's totally motivational and inspiring for them. They're taking on more, and that creates enormous excitement. Then it doesn't become so much a job, it becomes like, wow, this is an adventure. And that, I think, is part of the trick. There's a fine line between adventure, war, work, and burnout, or I'm too hard. But there's something there that I think is worth understanding and exploring. And if you think about your own career, anyone, you, Devin, any listeners, when have you been most excited and most full of energy? When you've been doing the same thing for 2, 3, 4 years? Or when you take on something new, maybe a little scary, maybe a little bigger, maybe it's like, on paper, I shouldn't be really qualified to be doing this, but okay, I'm going to go for it, sure. And maybe I can figure it out.
Yeah. No, that's great stuff. Hey, you've been so generous with your time today, Steve. Last question. So generally speaking, our listeners, they're people, they have a message. They're trying to grow their influence so that they can get that message out to more people. What's one thing that you could that you could share that might help them to grow that influence?
I think it's the message that I'll take for how was I able to be, and the lessons I've learned from my own career. Like, I believe when I was head of HR, that was the top of the mountain for my profession. There's no other job in HR that I would have wanted in the world. I'm master of my craft, doing my HR thing in a company that's making an HR product, so I can be a product advisor and I can also be selling. I had an experience where I was actually going into Walmart, the biggest company in America, aside from the government, selling. what's LinkedIn? And that was just like an out of body experience, incredible to go to their headquarters in Bentonville. But, I think I got to where I was. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have sort of some career, architect, I'm going to do this, and this. I just followed what I really love to do. And so those of you that are looking to build your platform or your path, make sure it's not what someone else is telling you to do. It's what you really know and really, really care about. I can get up in front of an audience and never be afraid because I know and I love what I'm talking about. So I don't have to worry about like a script or something. Like I don't need slides. I don't need anything. But I know my stuff, and I'm talking about, and I was lucky enough to sort of hone in on that, and I got pretty good at it. So that's what I would say is like, be authentic to that. Don't look at, oh, well, so-and-so did this, and this. Yeah, but that's not you. And that's my beef with a lot of people that go, companies that go, oh, let's go benchmark with Google. I go, okay, but you're not Google. You're not the founders. You're not in their product space. Listen, look at what they do, but then you got to translate that to your way of doing it. So I guess that'd be my advice.
Yeah, great stuff, Steve. Hey, so where can people find you online? I know I said that was
yeah. Oh, great. And thank you, Devin, for having me here and getting a chance to talk about stuff I love talking about. I have a website, stevecadigan.com. Just spell my name. I've been experimenting with a new TikTok. In the last 2 months, we've gathered like 25,000 followers. So we're pretty excited about experimenting with that new platform.
Yeah.
And talk about, having to get your elevator pitch out in 17 seconds is tricky.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No, I'll check that out for sure. I had heard that, but yeah, I wasn't sure what you were doing over there. Well, thanks so much for your time. And I wish you the best. Happy holidays here around the corner, and stay safe in this quarantine. Okay.
Thanks for having me, Devin. Yeah.
All right. Cheers.